Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. This morning, we are going to be reading through... which chapter? Wait a minute. I think it's chapter 52. Chapter 52 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. So if this is your first time watching, we're not just going to read the words. Sometimes we're going to stop and talk about interesting words or phrases that maybe if you're learning English you may not be familiar with. So we're also doing this live, so if you're watching this with me, then I really encourage you to ask questions in the comments. Ask about, what does that mean? What does this phrase mean? I don't understand. That's the whole point of doing this, is to understand the words, understand the sentences. It's a really good way, if you're learning English, to improve your vocabulary, especially if you're very advanced. So let's get started with chapter 52 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Let me just reposition this. All right. Now the title is I Assist at an Explosion. And you probably know that word assist to mean help, but actually here what it means, and it's probably closer to the original meaning, is attend, go to. Like you attend school, you assist school. It isn't used very much in contemporary English in that way, but I guess it still could be. It's more common to just use assist meaning help, and that's probably how you know it. But it also means to attend, to go somewhere. So when he says, I assist at an explosion, that means I go to an explosion. Some big crazy thing is happening, and Davy is right there. When the time Mr. Micawber had appointed so mysteriously was within 24 hours of being come, my aunt and I consulted how we should proceed, for my aunt was very unwilling to leave Dora. Ah, how easily I carried Dora up and down the stairs now. We were disposed, notwithstanding Mr. Micawber's stipulation for my aunt's attendance, to arrange that she should stay at home and be represented by Mr. Dick and me. In short, we had resolved to take this course, when Dora again, unsettled by us declaring that she never would forgive herself and never would forgive her bad boy if my aunt remained behind on any pretense. A pretense is an excuse. I won't speak to you, said Dora, shaking her curls at my aunt. I'll be disagreeable. Being disagreeable means being unpleasant, being not making it easy for the other people. So she's saying, if you stay, she wants the aunt to go to this important meeting. And she's saying, if you don't go, I'm going to give you a very difficult time. I'm going to be very difficult. I'm going to be very disagreeable with you. Anne is asking, what is unsettled? Let's see, what is unsettled? Where is it? Well, not what is it, where is it? When you settle something, you place it you place it somewhere, and there it stays, and it's nice and comfortable. To be unsettled means to be moving around and not staying in one place, or maybe uncomfortable. So here it kind of means uncomfortable. Dora was uncomfortable. Dora unsettled us. She made us uncomfortable by saying she would never forgive herself if the aunt didn't go to this important meeting. And she would never forgive her bad boy if my aunt remained behind on any pretense, on any excuse. I won't speak to you, said Dora, shaking her curls at my aunt. I'll be disagreeable. I'll make Jip bark at you all day. I shall be sure that you really are a cross old thing if you don't go. Tut, Blossom, laughed my aunt. You know you can't do without me. Yes, I can, said Dora. "You are no use to me at all. You never run up and down the stairs for me all day long. You never sit and tell me stories about Dodie when his shoes were worn out and he was covered with dust. Oh, what a poor little mite of a fellow. You never do anything at all to please me, do you, dear?" Dora made haste to kiss my aunt and say, "Yes, you do. I'm only joking," lest my aunt should think she really meant it. "But, Aunt," said Dora coaxingly, "now listen. You must go. I shall tease you till you let me have my own way about it. I shall lead my naughty boy such a life if he don't make you go. I shall make myself so disagreeable, and so will Jip. You will wish you had gone, like a good thing, forever and ever so long, if you don't go. Besides," said Dora, putting back her hair and looking wonderingly at my aunt, "why shouldn't you both go? I'm not very ill indeed, am I?" "Why, what a question!" cried my aunt. "What a fancy!" said I. "Yes, I know. I'm a silly thing," said Dora, slowly looking from one of us to the other, and then putting up her pretty lips to kiss us as she lay upon her couch. "Well then, you must both go, or I shall not believe you, and then I shall cry." I saw my aunt's face, that she began to give way now. To give way means to... I'm trying to think of a simple way to say this. They're having a fight, and the aunt is saying, "No, I'm not leaving you. I can't leave you. You're sick. I have to take care of you. And you can't convince me." And Dora was getting very upset because she really wants the aunt to go. And eventually now the aunt is starting to become weaker. She's thinking, well, maybe I can go. She's starting to give way. That's what it means. Here. I mean, there are other words like acquiesce and yield, but you probably aren't too familiar with those words either. So I think no matter how we say give way, it's difficult to explain, but it means like maybe making your position not so firm, becoming softer. "You'll come back with so much to tell me that it'll take at least a week to make me understand," said Dora, "because I know I shan't understand. For a length of time, if there's any business in it, and there's sure to be some business in it, if there's anything to add up besides, I don't know when I shall make it out, and my bad boy will look so miserable all the time. There. And Jip will take care of me while you're gone. Dodie, will you carry me upstairs before you go, and I won't come down again until you come back. You shall take Agnes a dreadfully scolding letter from me because she has never been to see us." N is saying, "Oh, is that like is give way like give in?" No, it's a little bit different, because give way is just to go back a little bit, and give in means surrender. Okay, I give up. So first the aunt will give way. She'll start becoming softer. First she's saying, no, I'm not leaving you. And then now Dora is convincing her, so she's thinking about it. Before she wasn't thinking about it. She's like, well, maybe she's right. Maybe it would be okay. This is giving way. This is like becoming a little bit softer on the topic. And eventually the aunt will give in. She surrenders. Okay, all right, I'll do it. So there's a little bit of a difference between giving way and giving in. We agreed, without any more consultation, that we would both go, and that Dora was a little impostor who feigned to be rather unwell because she liked to be petted. So Dora was saying, I'm not really sick. I just pretend that I'm sick so that you'll pay attention to me. Everybody knows that she's really sick. She's dying. But she's just saying, I'm not really sick. I just like the attention. So you see, you can go and I'm fine. She was greatly pleased and very merry. And we four, that is to say, my aunt, Mr. Dick, Traddles, and I, went down to Canterbury by the Dover mail that night. At the hotel where Mr. Micawber had requested us to await him, which we got into with some trouble in the middle of the night, I found a letter importing that he would appear in the morning punctually at 9:30, after which we went shivering. Shivering is when you're really cold and you feel like this. Oh, I'm shivering. It's just like shaking, little shaking. We were shivering at that uncomfortable hour to our respective beds through various closed passages, which smelt as if they had been steeped for ages in a solution of soup and stables. Import, maybe N is asking about the word. Oh, we've got two words. First, imposter. Dora is very sick, and the aunt is taking care of Dora. An imposter is someone who pretends to be something that they're not. So when Dora says, "I'm an imposter," that means I'm not really sick. I'm just pretending to be sick because I enjoy all of the attention. She really is sick. But she's just saying that so they won't feel guilty about leaving her for one day. And Anne is also asking about the word import. So maybe you know the word import, export, meaning export are things that a country will bring to other countries, and import is something that countries will take into their own country. But import here is the verb form of important. So, let's go back for a minute. Where was that letter? Well, here, let's read the line. It says, "I found a letter importing that he would appear in the morning punctually." So meaning giving us this important information. So it's like say and important together. But I don't trust you know what? I want to look up that definition. And says, oh, like imposter syndrome. Yeah, it's like imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is when you get a new job and you feel like you're not qualified, so you hide somewhere and you think, I can't do this. What am I doing? You're an imposter. You feel, well, you're not an imposter, but you feel like you're an imposter because you don't feel qualified to do the job. You feel inadequate. Import verb. See, I don't know if, let's see what Google says. To bring something from a foreign or external source. They don't even really have a definition like this. It's not important because it's not something that you would use in contemporary English anyway. Import and export is how you use that as a verb. But, okay, let's just continue. Early in the morning, I sauntered through the dear old tranquil streets. Sauntering is like walking, but let's see what the difference. I picture sauntering as like with a lot of movement, but let's see what Google says about that. To walk in an idle or leisurely manner. So it's like wander. Saunter is like wander. Wander is more common to say. Early in the morning, I sauntered through the dear old tranquil streets, and again mingled. Remember, mingle, we've been seeing that word a lot recently. It means like mixing. And again mingled with the shadows of the venerable gateway and churches. The rooks were sailing about the cathedral towers, and the towers themselves overlooking many young unaltered mile of the rich country and its pleasant streams. Were cutting bright morning air, as if there were no such thing as change on earth. Yet the bells, when they sounded, told me sorrowfully of the change in everything, told me of their own age, and my pretty Dora's. And my pretty Dora's youth, and of many never told, who had lived and loved and died, while the reverberations of the bells had hummed through the rusty armor of the Black Prince, hanging up with the motes upon the deep of time, had lost themselves in air as circles do in water. I looked at the old house from the corner of the street, but did not go nearer to it, lest being observed, I might unwittingly do any harm. You know, that word wit kind of means like know, to know something, in a way. Not exactly, but in a way. And so to unwittingly do something means unknowingly or unintentionally do something. I might unwittingly do any harm to the design I had come to aid. So they're going to... It sounds like they're going to Doctor's... whoa, gosh, now I can't remember his name. Not Dr. Strong. Well, he's going to a house where he used to stay. I can't remember the man's name. And he stayed there for many years while he was going to school and growing up. And he was very tempted to walk inside. But he didn't want to change any of the plans Mr. Micawber had. So Mr. Micawber said, I'll be there exactly at 9:30. And so Davy was a little bit early and he wanted to go inside, but he thought, oh, if I do that, maybe I'll ruin the plans unknowingly, unwittingly. So he didn't go. The early sun was striking edgewise on its stables and the lattice windows, touching them with gold, and some beams of old peace seemed to touch my heart. I strolled into the country for an hour or so, and then returned by the main street, which in the interval had shaken off its last night's sleep. Among those who were stirring in the shops, I saw my ancient enemy, the butcher, now advanced to top boots and a baby, and in business for himself. He was nursing the baby, and appeared to be benignant, a benignant member of society. We all became very anxious and impatient when we sat down to breakfast. As it approached nearer and nearer to 9:30, our restless expectation of Mr. Micawber increased. At last we made no more pretense of attending to the meal. So remember, pretense means like excuse. Anne is asking about the word benignant. When you see that word bene means good in Latin. So when you see that word bene a lot of times in front of a word, that's always a good thing. So benefit is something good that you receive. Or I'm trying to think of other words with bene in front of it that mean good. Benefactor is someone who gives good things to other people. When you have cancer, when somebody has cancer, there are two kinds of cancer. You have benign cancer, and by the way, benign is spelled B-N-I-G-N, right? Oh, let me just make sure about that. I'm horrible at spelling. Yeah, benign is spelled B-N-I-G-N. Benign cancer is cancer. You have cancer, but it won't kill you. They can do something for it. But then you have malignant cancer, and that word M-A-L, mal, means evil, bad. It's a Latin word. It's the opposite of bene, which is good. So if you have malignant cancer, that's evil cancer. That's dangerous cancer. That's bad cancer. So you have that word benign, that always means good. So to be a benignant, and that's not a word that you would use in contemporary English, but you can guess that means a good member of society, a useful member of society. Before, when Davy was growing up and the butcher boy was also growing up, they were enemies and they always wanted to fight, and the butcher boy was making trouble. But now he's in charge of the butcher shop and he's got a baby, and he seems to be a benignant member of society, a good member of society. At last, we made no more pretense of attending the meal, which, except with Mr. Dick, had been a mere form from the first. But my aunt, so they were all pretending to eat breakfast and enjoying their breakfast, but really they only cared about this meeting, this mysterious meeting with Mr. Micawber that was supposed to be at 9:30. Except Mr. Dick. Mr. Dick was enjoying his breakfast. But my aunt walked up and down the room, and Traddles sat upon the sofa, affecting to read. Affecting here means like going through the motions. So he had a book in front of his face. He obviously wasn't reading. He was just thinking about this mysterious meeting, but he was pretending to read, affecting to read. Affecting to read the paper with his eyes on the ceiling. So he had the paper in front of him, but he was looking up thinking, what's going on? What is this meeting going to be about? And I looked out of the window to give early notice of Mr. Micawber's coming. Nor had I long to watch, for at the first chime of the half hour he appeared in the street. Chime is the sound of a bell. So the clock has a bell inside of it, and when the clock struck 9:30, ding, 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 that's the bell chiming. So at the first chime of 9:30 he appeared. "Here he is," said I, "and not in his legal attire." Now attire is clothing, dress. So he's wearing normal street clothes. He's not dressed in his suit like a lawyer. My aunt tied the strings of her bonnet. She had come down to breakfast in it, and put her shawl as if she were ready for anything that was resolute and uncompromising. Traddles buttoned his coat with a determined air. Mr. Dick, disturbed by these formidable appearances, but feeling it necessary to imitate them, pulled his hat with both of his hands as firmly over his ears as he possibly could, and instantly took it off again to welcome Mr. Micawber. "Gentlemen and madam," said Mr. Micawber, "good morning, my dear sir," to Mr. Dick, who shook his hands with him violently. "You are extremely good." "Have you breakfasted?" said Mr. Dick. "Have a chop." "Not for the world, my dear sir," cried Mr. Micawber, stopping him on his way to the bell. "Appetite and myself, Mr. Dick, have long been strangers." Okay, I just have to take a 1-minute break. Sorry. I'll be back in 1 minute. Wait a minute, if I can find my be right back screen. All right, we're back. Thank you for waiting. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh, what is Mr. Micawber going to tell them all about? Mr. Dickson... Oh, wait. Let me reread this. "Not for the world, my good sir," cried Mr. Micawber, stopping himself on his way to the bell. "Appetite and myself, Mr. Dickson, have long been strangers." Oh, so is Dickson Mr. Dick's real name? I always thought that his name was very strange, Mr. Dick. But maybe his real name is Mr. Dickson. Mr. Dickson was so well pleased with his new name. Oh, his name is Mr. Dick, but for some reason Mr. Micawber thought it was Dickson, because now Mr. Dick he likes it. He likes his new name. Mr. Dickson was so well pleased with his new name, and appeared to think it so obliging in Mr. Micawber to confer it upon him. To confer means to give. To confer it upon him, that he shook hands with him and laughed rather childishly. "Dick," said my aunt, "attention." Mr. Dick recovered himself with a blush. "Now, sir," said my aunt to Mr. Micawber, as she put on her gloves, "we are ready for Mount Vesuvius, or anything else, as soon as you please." "Madam," returned Mr. Micawber, "I trust you will shortly witness an eruption. Mr. Traddles, I have your permission, I believe, to mention here that we have been in communication together?" "It is undoubtedly the fact, Copperfield," said Traddles, to whom I looked surprised. So Mr. Micawber and Traddles had been communicating secretly, which surprised Davy, and I'm sure the aunt also. "Mr. Micawber has consulted me in reference to what he has in contemplation, and I have advised him to the best of my judgment." "Unless I deceive myself, Mr. Traddles," pursued Mr. Micawber, "what I contemplate is a disclosure of an important nature." "Highly so," said Traddles. So Mr. Micawber says, "And you agree this is very serious, very important information?" And Traddles says, "Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, definitely." "Perhaps, under such circumstances..." Oh, Anne is asking about breakfast as a verb. Like, well, Mr. Micawber speaks in a very strange way. And it's also possible that, this is 170 years ago this was written. It's also possible that they did use it as a verb at the time. Yeah, you can still use it as a verb. We breakfast at 10. Well, that would be very late, right, for breakfast? You could, but it sounds very formal. I wouldn't use that as a verb, but you could. So maybe it was more common a couple of 100 years ago to use it as a verb. You have dinner, and then you have the verb to dine. And you can also use lunch as a verb. We lunch at 4. But it sounds very formal to talk like that. So normally you would say we had lunch, we had dinner. And if you use those words as verbs, for some reason, I don't know why, it sounds very formal. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it. Anne is asking about the word disclosure. Disclosure means to share a secret. Where was that? I don't remember the word I remember breakfasted, because I thought that was funny. Oh, here it is. "Unless I deceive myself, Mr. Traddles," pursued Mr. Micawber, "what I contemplate is a disclosure of an important nature." So that means I'm about to share a secret with you that's very important. To disclose something is to share a secret, to tell everyone a secret. "Perhaps, under such circumstances, madam and gentlemen," said Mr. Micawber, "if you will do me the favor to submit yourselves, for the moment, to the direction of one of who, however unworthy to be regarded in any other light, but as a waif and a stray upon the shore of human nature, is still your fellow man." So, again, Mr. Micawber speaks in a very difficult way of a very difficult way of understanding. So even for me, it's really difficult to understand what he's saying. But he's saying, please give me your attention for a minute, even though you're up here and I'm down here. Though crushed out of his original form by individual errors and the accumulative force of a combination of circumstances. Okay, so he's saying, can you please just give me your attention and pay serious and treat it seriously what I'm about to say, even though I'm such a low person? We have perfect confidence in you, Mr. Micawber, said I, and I will do what you please. Mr. Copperfield, returned Mr. Micawber, your confidence is not without, at the existing juncture, ill bestowed. I would beg to be allowed a start of 5 minutes by the clock, and then to receive the present company inquiring for Miss Wickfield at the office of Wickfield and Heap, whose stipendiary I am. So Mr. Micawber is saying, thank you for having trust in me, and give me 5 minutes because we're still waiting for Miss Wickfield. Okay, well, and Mr. Micawber uses very unusual language, but juncture is like a crossing point, like an intersection. So your confidence is not at the existing juncture ill bestowed. So other times maybe you shouldn't trust me so much, but at this juncture, at this point where we meet, at this place where we're meeting, thank you for giving me your trust. This is one time when you can definitely trust me. Maybe in the other areas not. But right now, trust and me are meeting. And bestow is another way of saying give. And ill is a very negative word. If you put ill in front of something, it means it's bad, it's a mistake. So he's saying, your trust in me at this moment, just at this moment, at this juncture. Sometimes you'll see people saying that. At this juncture, I can't quit my job. That means my finances and my life situation, where they're meeting, it's not possible for me to quit my job. Ill bestowed means badly given. So he's saying, your trust in me at this moment is not badly given. Okay, but you'll never see, in contemporary English, you won't hear people saying ill bestowed. But maybe juncture, yes. My aunt and I looked at Traddles, who nodded his approval. I have no more, observed Mr. Micawber, to say at present. So they have to wait 5 minutes for Miss Wickfield to come. With which, to my infinite surprise, he included us all in a comprehensive bow, and disappeared, his manner being extremely distant, and his face extremely pale. Traddles only smiled and shook his head, with his hair standing upright on top of it, when I looked at him for an explanation. So I took out my watch and, as a last resource, counted off 5 minutes. So Traddles knows what's happening, and Davy looks at him like, what's going on? But he won't say anything. So Davy just sat there looking at his watch for 5 minutes to pass. My aunt, with her own watch in her hand, did the like. When the time was expired, Traddles gave her his arm, and we all went out together to the old house without saying one word on the way. When we found Mr. Micawber at his desk in the turret office, a turret is like a tower. So the office is in a tower part of the house. Anne is asking about counting off. I think that probably in contemporary English you would say count down. That's like 10, 9, 8, 7. So they're just looking at their watches, waiting for 5 minutes to pass because they want to know what's happening. We found Mr. Micawber at his desk in the turret office on the ground floor, either writing or pretending to write hard. The large office ruler was stuck into his waistcoat, and he was not so well concealed but that a foot or more of the instrument protruded from his bosom, like a new kind of shirt frill. As it appeared to me that I was expected to speak, I said aloud, "How do you do, Mr. Micawber?" "Mr. Copperfield," said Mr. Micawber gravely, "I hope I see you well." "Is Miss Wickfield at home?" said I. Mr. Wickfield is unwell in bed, sir, of rheumatic fever," he returned. "But Miss Wickfield, I have no doubt, will be happy to see old friends. Will you walk in, sir?" He preceded us to the dining room, the first room I had entered in that house. So Davy's remembering when he was a little boy, and the first time he came into the house, he entered into the dining room. Anne is asking about the word protrude, and that means something is going out, and it's not supposed to go out. I want to find a picture of, I wonder what kind of pictures we'll see if we look at pictures of protrude. Let's see. Oh, not really anything too horrible. Well, let's see if I can, but these aren't really good examples. Let me see if I can find a different picture. I'm surprised you don't, the thing I thought that they would show, they don't show. Let me see. Okay, here's a good example. Okay, so normally the shirt should cover the stomach, but if you have a big fat stomach like me, then maybe your stomach will protrude from your shirt. So that means something is going out when it's not supposed to be going out, or something is showing when it shouldn't be showing. Or you can see something you're not supposed to see. It's funny because if I just type protruding without protruding belly, they talk about teeth. And they show pictures like, well, let's see, what is this? I'm not even sure what's supposed, protrusion of what? What do you think is protruding here? The lips? Did they change the lips? This is a cosmetic surgery. Or maybe the nose? I don't think so. I can't tell what was protruding there. But they show teeth a lot. So, you know, if somebody's teeth are sticking out, that's usually not supposed to happen. So you can call that protruding teeth. And that's mostly what they show pictures of. Protruding eyes? I don't see that as protruding. What about this guy? Those are protruding teeth. So Mr. Micawber has some big instrument with him, and it's protruding from underneath the desk or something like that, if I remember correctly. He preceded us into the dining room. I had entered into that house. The first room I had entered in that house, and flinging open the door of Mr. Wickfield's former office, said in a sonorous voice, "Miss Trotwood, Mr. Copperfield, Mr. Thomas Traddles, and Mr. Dickson." I had not seen Uriah Heep since the time of the blow. So the last time that Davy saw Uriah Heep, he hit him. Our visit astonished his surprise. Evidently, not the less, I dare say, because it astonished ourselves. He did not gather his eyebrows together, for he had none worth mentioning. But he frowned to that degree that he almost closed his small eyes, while the hurried raising of his grisly hand to his chin betrayed some trepidation or surprise. This was only when we were in the act of entering his room, and when I caught a glance at him over my aunt's shoulder, a moment afterwards, he was fawning and as humble as ever. Fawning is when you pay a lot of attention to people in an overly kind way. "Oh, how are you doing? I'm so glad you're here. Please sit down here. Have a cup of tea. Make yourself warm. Make yourself comfortable. Would you like something to eat?" That's fawning over someone. So at first he was, "What are they doing here?" But then he regained his composure. And then he was his normal self, acting very humble and fawning over people. "Well, I'm sure," he said, "this is indeed an unexpected pleasure, to have, as I may say, all friends round St. Paul's at once, is a treat unlooked for." Anna's asking about the word trepidation. That means being cautious, but let me just make sure. Most of the time I'm pretty good with definitions, but sometimes I really mess it up. A feeling of fear or agitation that something may happen. So when you're trepidatious about something, you're afraid something is about to happen, so you're being cautious. How did they use it? So when they first entered the room, he put his hand over his mouth and looked like a little bit of... He looked with... There was trepidation or surprise on his face, like, "What are you doing here?" Afraid something was about to happen. "Well, I am sure," he said, "this is indeed an unexpected pleasure, to have, as I may say, all friends round St. Paul's at once is a treat unlooked for." Anna's saying maybe it's like dread. Yeah, it's kind of like dread, but I think with dread, that's why I think caution is a good word, or a good synonym for trepidation, because when you dread something, you're just feeling like, oh no, something horrible is happening. But with trepidation, you're like, what should I do? I'm afraid. I have to be careful. I think that's kind of the difference. To have, as I may say, all friends round St. Paul's at once is a treat unlooked for. Mr. Copperfield, I hope I see you well, and if I may humbly express myself so, friendly towards them as is ever your friends, whether or not. Mrs. Copperfield, sir, I hope she's getting on. We have been made quite uneasy by the poor accounts we have had here of her state lately, I do assure you. So he's saying, I've heard that your wife is very unwell. I hope that she's okay. Things are changed in this office, Miss Trotwood, since I was an humble clerk, and held your pony, ain't they? Said Uriah with his sickliest smile. A really ugly smile. But I'm not changed, Miss Trotwood. Well, sir, returned my aunt, to tell you the truth, I think you are pretty constant to the promise of your youth, if that's any satisfaction to you. Thank you, Miss Trotwood, said Uriah. Oh, Antonio Montana is here. Hey, Antonio, haven't seen you in a while. Thank you, Miss Trotwood, said Uriah, writhing in his ungainly manner, for your good opinion, Mr. Micawber. Tell him to let Miss Agnes know, and Mother. Mother will be quite in a state. To be in a state means to be in some kind of chaotic way. You know, like, that's not a very good Definition. To be in a state means panicking, running around, excited. Excited. Let's say to be in a state means to be excited. Good or bad. To be in a state means in some kind of excitement. So when he says, oh, I'm going to tell Mother you're here and she will be in a state, that means she will be very excited. Antonio says, can't join much because of work and girlfriend. Well, we're glad to see you here today, Antonio. Mother will be in quite in a state when she sees the present company, says Uriah, setting the chairs. You're not busy, Mr. Heep, said Traddles, whose eye the cunning red eye accidentally caught, as it once scrutinized and evaded us. Now, cunning means like sneaky, always planning and making plans and doing things. So Uriah Heep has cunning eyes, like he's always planning something. No, Mr. Traddles, replied Uriah, resuming his official seat and squeezing his bony hands laid palm to palm between his bony knees. Not so much so as I could wish. But lawyers, sharks and leeches are not easily satisfied, you know. But what myself and Micawber have our hands pretty full in general on account of Mr. Wickfield's being hardly fit for any occupation, sir. So he's saying we don't have much business, but Mr. Micawber and I are usually pretty busy because Mr. Wickfield is so sick he can hardly work. Resume, Anne is asking about the word resume, and resume just means continue. It's another way of saying continue. So in this case, to resume his seat, maybe he left his seat or he stood up when the guests entered the room. And so when he resumes his seat, that means he's returning to his seat. He's continuing sitting. But it's a pleasure as well as a duty, I'm sure, to work for him. You've not been intimate with Mr. Wickfield, I think, Mr. Traddles? So Uriah is saying, you've never met Mr. Wickfield, have you? I believe I've only had the honor of seeing you once myself. No, I have not been intimate with Mr. Wickfield. That just means I haven't met him, returned Traddles, or I might perhaps have waited on you long ago, Mr. Heep. There was something in the tone of this reply which made Uriah look at the speaker again with a very sinister means evil, and suspicious expression. What are you up to? Because he's saying you've never met Mr. Wickfield, and Traddles says no. If I had met with Mr. Wickfield earlier, I would have been dealing with you earlier. And that made Uriah suspicious. What is he talking about? What do they have planned? But seeing only Traddles with his good-natured face, simple manner, and hair on end, he dismissed it as he replied with a jerk of his whole body. A jerk is a quick movement, but especially his throat. I am sorry for that, Mr. Traddles. You have admired him as much as we all do. His little failings would only have endeared him to you the more. But if you would like to hear my fellow partner eloquently speak of, I should refer you to Mr. Copperfield. The family is a subject he's very strong upon, if you've never heard him. I was prevented from disclaiming the compliment, if I should have done so in any case, by the entrance of Agnes, now ushered in by Mr. Micawber. That word usher, and it really depends if you've ever had this experience. Some people don't, but if you go to, for example, a theater, maybe like to an orchestra or to an opera or some kind of event. Maybe they don't do this anymore. I'm old. But a lot of times when you go to a theater, like for example the opera or the orchestra or some kind of live event, it's a very big theater, a very, very big place. And there will be people, and traditionally they wear a uniform, something like this, and they will show you to your seat because it's very hard to find your seat in such a big place. And this is an usher. This is like an escort, someone who will take you to your seat because it's not so easy to find. So to usher someone is to lead them to a place, to take them to a place, or to escort them to a place. More as a guide than a friend, though. So if it's a friend, maybe it could be escort. Let me escort you to your seat. Oh, how nice. Let's have a conversation. But if someone says, let me usher you to your seat, it's, here, I'll take you to your seat. So that's kind of the difference between escort and usher. With usher, the focus is on, here, let's get to that place. And with escort, it's keep me company, talk to me while we go to this place. So I was prevented from disclaiming the compliment, if I should have done so in any case, by the entrance of Agnes, now ushered in by Mr. Micawber. So Micawber is bringing her into the room. She was not quite so self-possessed as usual, I thought, and had evidently undergone anxiety and fatigue, but her earnest cordiality and her quiet beauty shone with a gentler luster for it. I saw Uriah Heep watch her while she greeted us, and he reminded me of an ugly and rebellious genie watching a good spirit. In the meanwhile, some slight sign passed between Mr. Micawber and Traddles. So Traddles and Mr. Micawber did like a secret signal between each other, a very small one. Anne is asking about the word luster. To me, that means shining, but let me just check the definition. A gentle sheen or soft glow. Do you know what glow is? Glow is like a soft light. Let's take a look at the difference between glow and shining, just so we can see what the difference is. So look at this beautiful water here. It's giving light, but it's not a very intense light. It's just a soft glow. That's a glow. The light is glowing. Compare that to shining. Oh, that's a movie. Oh no. You see, that's the problem, that every word is the name of some stupid character in a movie or something now, so it's impossible to just find an example. Oh, let's see, shiny metal. So when you look at shiny, that's reflecting light also, but it's more intense. Although this doesn't really make my case for me. How about shiny sun? See, the sun shines, but that water was glowing. And luster is a soft glow. So if you're talking about, sometimes when you see somebody and they look sick, but you don't really know why. Antonio Montana is saying maybe you should look for an animation. Yeah, maybe that would be better to look, but then probably be an animation of a cartoon character. But I'll try that next time. But have you ever sometimes you look at a person and you think, oh, you look sick, but you don't really know why. Maybe you could say they've lost their luster. Like usually there's a glow of life coming from them. But The only thing that looks different is they don't have that glow because they feel sick. So maybe you could understand it in that way. That's what he means when it says that Agnes has lost her luster. She looks sick. She doesn't have that glow of life coming from her. Mr. Micawber and Traddles, unobserved, except by me, went out. "Don't wait, Micawber," said Uriah. Mr. Micawber, with his hand upon the ruler in his breast, stood erect before the door. And says, like, maybe they're pale. Well, pale just means you don't have any color. Like, you look at my face and you see there's a lot of red. But if it's just all white, that's no color. And yes, that could mean sick too. But I think when you talk about, like, you've lost your glow, it's more spiritual, I think, than just observing the color. It's kind of like the eyes. You know, think of the eyes. Sometimes there's no light in someone's eyes, but eyes shine more than they have luster. But I think it's that kind of perception that you have. "Don't wait, Micawber," said Uriah. Mr. Micawber, with his hand upon the ruler in his breast. Oh, by the way, that was the thing that was protruding from his waistcoat, was a ruler. But let me show you what a ruler is, because it's possible you don't know what that is. This is a ruler. So maybe he uses that for writing, and he kept it in his coat pocket, so it was protruding. Mr. Micawber, with his hand upon the ruler in his breast, stood erect before the door, more unmistakably contemplating one of his fellow men, that man his employer. "What are you waiting for?" said Uriah. "Micawber, did you hear me tell you not to wait?" "Yes," replied the immovable Mr. Micawber. "Then why do you wait?" said Uriah. "Because I, in short, choose," replied Mr. Micawber with a burst. A burst is like an explosion. So Uriah's the boss, and Mr. Micawber is not listening to him. And he's being rude. Uriah's cheeks lost color, and an unwholesome paleness still faintly tinged. See, Uriah never has any luster. He never has any glow. He doesn't have any life, but he can lose his color. Uriah's cheeks lost color, and an unwholesome paleness, still faintly tinged by his pervading red, overspread them. He looked at Mr. Micawber attentively, with his whole face breathing short and quick in every feature. "You are a dissipated fellow, as all the world knows," he said, with an effort at a smile, "and I'm afraid you'll oblige me to get rid of you. Go along. I'll talk to you presently." So Uriah is shocked that Mr. Micawber is not listening to him, and he says, "Leave the room. I'll talk to you later. I'll deal with you later." Okay, I'm sorry, but I do have to take a 1-minute break. I'll be right back. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. Thanks for waiting. Okay, so Uriah is telling him, go away. I'll deal with you later, employee. If there is a scoundrel on this earth, a scoundrel is a horrible person, a person who cheats other people, a criminal. If there is a scoundrel on this earth, said Mr. Micawber, suddenly breaking out, with the utmost vehemence, vehemence means a very strong feeling, a very, well, let me define that. Vehement, showing a strong feeling, forceful, passionate, or intense. If there is a scoundrel on this earth, said Mr. Micawber, suddenly breaking out again with the utmost vehemence, intense talking, with whom I have already talked too much, that scoundrel's name is Heap. Uriah fell back, as if he had been struck or stung, looking slowly round upon us with the darkest and wickedest expression that his face could wear. He said in a lower voice, "Oh, this is a conspiracy. You have met me here by appointment. You are playing booty with my clerk, are you, Copperfield? Now take care. You'll make nothing of this. We understand each other, you and me. There's no love between us. You were always a puppy with a proud stomach from your first coming here, and you envy my rise, do you? None of your plots against me. I'll counterplot you, Micawber. You be off. I'll talk to you presently." So he's telling Micawber again, you go away, and I'll deal with you later. "Mr. Micawber," said I, "there's a sudden change in this fellow, in more respects than the extraordinary one of his speaking the truth in one particular, which assures me that he is brought to bay. Deal with him as he deserves." "You are a precious set of people, ain't you?" said Uriah in the same low voice, and breaking out into a clammy heat. We've had that word clammy before. I don't remember. I think it was in this book. Do you know what a clam is? This is a good word to know, so let's just take a minute to look at this word clam. This is a clam. Okay, but think about how a clam feels. It's wet and cold. So if somebody feels clammy, they're wet and cold. It's a very ugly feeling. You feel clammy a lot of times when you're sick, because you have a fever and you're very hot on the inside, but for some reason your outside is very cold, and you get cold and wet, and that's what clammy is. It's a very ugly feeling. So it's funny too, they're always describing Uriah as clammy. When you shake his hand, he's got clammy hands. "You are a precious set of people, ain't you?" said Uriah in the same low voice, and breaking out into a clammy heat, which he wiped from his forehead with his long, lean hand, to buy over my clerk, who is the very scum of society. Scum is like dirt. As you yourself were, Copperfield. You know it, before anyone had charity on you to defame me with his lies. Miss Trotwood, you had better stop this, or I'll stop your husband shorter than will be pleasant to you. So Uriah knows about Aunt Betsy's secret husband. I won't know your story professionally for nothing, old lady, Miss Wickfield. If you have any love for your father, you had better not join that gang. I'll ruin him if you do. Now come, I've got some of you under the harrow. Sarkhan says, "Oh, so freak! Did we see the word clammy in Gone with the? I'm confused. I read too many books. I think it was just in this book, but maybe I guess we could have used it in Gone with the Wind also. It's a good word. It's a pretty useful word to know, but it's always bad. It's never good to be clammy. Now come. I've got some of you under my harrow. I don't know what a harrow is. Let me see what a harrow. Harrow. An implement consisting of a heavy frame set with teeth or tines, which is dragged or plowed. Oh, it's a very strange... Okay. It's farm vocabulary. So here, this is a harrow. So Uriah is saying, I've got you all under my harrow, like maybe under my control. You're in my prison. Where is it? I lost my place. Let me find my... Think twice before it goes over you. Think twice, Micawber, if you don't want to be crushed. I recommend you to take yourself off and be talked to presently, you fool, while there's time to retreat. Where's Mother? He said, suddenly appearing to notice with alarm the absence of Traddles, and pulling down the bell rope. Fine doings in a person's own house. It's not his house, though. Mrs. Heep is here, sir, said Traddles, returning with that worthy mother of a worthy son. I have taken the liberty of making myself known to her. Who are you to make yourself known? Retorted Uriah. And what do you want here? I am the agent and friend of Mr. Wickfield, sir, said Traddles in a composed... Remember, composure means showing no emotion, showing just like a poker face, being very... not showing happiness or sadness or nervousness. To be composed means to sit without showing anything of what you're thinking or feeling. So yeah, Uriah's getting very upset. Who are you to do all of this? And Traddles says in a very calm way, showing no emotion, being very composed, I'm an agent and friend of Mr. Wickfield, sir. And is asking about the word retort, which means that's another way of saying reply. So, but usually there is a difference though, because usually a retort is a reply to a specific comment. I just want to make sure about that. Let me check something. Reply is usually the answer to a question or statement or comment, and it's a general term to encompass any form of answer. But a retort is quick and intended to contradict someone. So that's kind of the difference. So Uriah is getting very defensive. So he's not answering questions, he's retorting. He's answering the question, trying to fight off these people. So there's a bit of aggressiveness in the idea of a retort. So don't retort someone's email, just reply to someone's email. But if someone says something not very nice to you, then you can make a retort, which would be a reply saying, that's not true, you're a jerk. I don't know. That's not a very good retort. I'm an agent and friend of Mr. Wickfield, sir, said Traddles, in a composed and businesslike way, and I have a power of attorney from him in my pocket to act for him in all manners. The old ass has drunk himself into a state of dotage, said Uriah, turning uglier than before. To be in your dotage means to becoming old and not being able to think or not having very much energy. So when he says, that old ass has drunk himself into a state of dotage, Mr. Wickfield is already an old man, but he also drinks a lot of alcohol. So he's saying he's so old and drunk all the time, he can't think or act for himself anymore. Turning uglier than before, and it has been got from him by fraud. Something has been got from him by fraud, I know, returned Traddles quietly, and so do you, Mr. Heap. We will refer that question, if you please, to Mr. Micawber. Uri, Mrs. Heap began with an anxious gesture. You hold your tongue, mother, he returned. Least said, soonest mended. We've had that word several times. Mending is fixing. It's especially used for fixing clothes by sewing. That's mending clothes. But, if you're sick and you're getting better, you can say, I'm on the mend. I'm getting better. I'm improving. Or sometimes you talk about mending relationships, fixing relationships that have gone bad. So that's a pretty useful word. Mending is similar to fix. And so this is a saying. Least said, the least you say, the smallest amount of words you use, soonest mended, meaning if you don't use many words, it's easier to fix later. But my Uri, will you hold your tongue, mother, and leave it to me? Though I had long known that his servility was false, and all his pretenses knavish and hollow, knave. Let's look up the word knave. Dishonest, unscrupulous. So, this is a fancy word. But let's see, where did it go? Though I had long known that his servility was false, and all of his pretenses were knavish, meaning all of his fake behavior of acting so kind to everyone was, you knew that underneath that was somebody trying to trick you. He didn't mean it. I had no adequate conception of the extent of his hypocrisy until I now saw him with his mask off, the suddenness with which he dropped it when he perceived that it was useless to him, the malice. So remember earlier we talked about that word benignant, and we said that, if you see bene in front of something, that means good. And if you see mal in front of something, that means evil or bad in the Latin language. So here you have malice. The malice, that means like the hatred. The malice, the insolence, the hatred he revealed. Malice, though, has the idea of you want to hurt people. When you do something with malice, you do it with the intention of hurting other people. That's what makes it evil. You want to do it. You enjoy it. And says like benevolence. Yeah, benevolence means kindness, being good to other people, acting in good ways. So you have that word bene. And the opposite of benevolence is malevolence, which means acting in an evil way or a bad way. So bene means good and mal means evil or bad. The leer which he exulted, even at this moment, and the evil he had done all this time being desperate too, and at his wit's end for the means of getting the better of us, though perfectly consistent with the experience I had of him at first, took even me by surprise, who had known him so long and disliked him so heartily. So Davy is He always knew that Uriah was fake, full of it, is how you would say it in contemporary English. He always knew that Uriah was full of it, with all of his kindness and being nice. It was so obviously fake. But even he was surprised to see how quickly he could drop that and show his real character, which is very evil. I say nothing of the look he conferred on me, as he stand eyeing us, one after another. For I had always understood that he hated me, and I remembered the marks of my hand upon his cheek. But when his eyes passed on Agnes, and I saw the rage with which he felt his power over her slipping away. So he was going to marry this beautiful Agnes, because he had power over the father and over the family. And although it was not suitable for them to be married, his father had no choice but to agree to let them to be married. And now he's watching that slip away. That means like it's going away very slowly. Going away. So, and he's getting angry because now he sees that he's been discovered and he'll never marry Agnes. And you can just see all the anger coming out of him. I saw the rage with which actually, let's take Antonio Montana's suggestion to heart right now. And let's see what happens if we try to find an animation of slip away, because I think that's a pretty useful phrasal verb. Slip, you probably know. Slippery, like you step on a banana peel and it's slippery, or you see the sign when they're mopping the floor, warning, slippery when wet. So slip is this kind of movement. So slip away means like going away with that kind of movement. Here's an animation of the hands slipping away from each other. It's kind of sad, a little bit sad. Let's see if we can find another slip away type of animation here. Let's see. Oh wait, that's just words. That doesn't really show us anything. No. I guess that was the best animation that we could find for that. Okay, but slipping away is kind of a sad thing. You're watching something move away. So he had this power over Agnes. He's a very ugly, evil, horrible person, and he was going to marry the beautiful, gracious Agnes. And now he's just watching that slip away. And you can see the rage in his face as he sees it happening. But when his eyes passed onto Agnes, and I saw the rage with which he felt his power over her slipping away, and the exhibition in their disappointment of the odious, odio, that means hatred. So odious, the hateful passions that had led him to aspire to one of those virtues he could never appreciate or care for, I was shocked by the mere thought of her having lived an hour within the sight of such a man. After some rubbing of the lower part of his face, and some looking at us with those bad eyes over his grisly fingers. We keep seeing that word grisly. I'm not sure how to define that word. Let's take a look. You know, there's bears, and then there's the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear is the big scary one. Not like the other bears aren't scary, but the grizzly bear, I think, is extra scary. Grisly means causing horror or disgust. So those fingers, those clammy fingers, cause horror and disgust. The grisly fingers. He made one more address to me, half whining. Whining is, oh, little children do that. Can I have some chocolate? No. Oh, I want some chocolate. Give me some or a little dog. Oh. That's whining. He made one more address to me, half whining and half abusive. Let's see if we can whine this. You think you're justifiable, don't you? So that's kind of a whining, or do you? You think you're justifiable, do you? Do you? You think you're justifiable, do you, Copperfield? You who pride yourself... This is whining. I'm trying to read this in a whining voice. It's kind of annoying. That's a very annoying way when people talk like that. You think it's justifiable, do you, Copperfield? You who pride yourself so much on your honor and all the rest of it, to sneak about my place, eavesdropping. We had eavesdropping. That wasn't Gone with the Wind. I remember that. Eavesdropping is when you're listening to a conversation and you're not supposed to be listening to it. You think it justifiable. I'm not going to read it like that anymore. You get the idea of whining. You think it justifiable, do you, Copperfield? You who pride yourself so much on your honor and all the rest of it, to sneak about my place, eavesdropping with my clerk. Had been me. That doesn't make any sense. Wait a minute. If it had been me, I shouldn't have wondered, for I don't make myself out a gentleman. So Uriah is saying, I don't pretend to be a gentleman. I'm not a gentleman, so I don't have to pretend to have all these rules to live by or behave by. Though I never was in the streets either, as you were, according to Mr. Micawber. But being you... And you're not afraid of doing this either. You don't think at all about what I shall do in return, or of getting yourself into trouble for conspiracy and so forth. Very well. We shall see. Mr. What's-your-name. That's a very rude way of addressing someone when you can't think of their name. So don't do that. But it's kind of funny sometimes to do it. When you think, who was that guy in the movie? What's his name? You know, you do that usually when you can't remember somebody's name. But if you say, hey, what's your name? That's very rude. Don't do that. So this is very rude of Uriah to say, Mr. What's your name? Like, I don't remember your name, and I don't care. Mr. What's your name? You were going to refer to some question to Mr. Micawber. There's your referee. Why don't you make him speak? He hasn't learned his lesson, I see. Seeing that what he said had no effect on me or any of us, he sat on the edge of his table with his hands in his pockets, and one of his splay feet twisted round the other leg, waiting doggedly for what might follow. Well, let's see what splay means. Splay, thrust or spread. Spread apart. So thrust is like push forward. So I guess maybe 1 foot, because he's leaning up against the desk, maybe 1 foot is with the desk and the other foot is kind of sticking out. And I'm just curious what the definition of doggedly is. I guess it means like a dog, but I'm just not sure in what manner. Tenacity, grim persistence. So maybe think of a dog sniffing a trail, very persistent, not giving up, paying very close attention. Very thorough. Seeing what he said had no effect on me or any of us, he sat at the edge of his table, with his hands in his pockets, one of his splay feet twisted around the other leg, waiting doggedly for what might follow. So maybe one of his feet was, like if you're nervous and one of your feet is doing something like that. Mr. Micawber, whose impetuosity to be impetuous means to be very forward, to not be reserved, to not hold anything back. Mr. Micawber, whose impetuosity I had restrained thus far. Mr. Micawber wanted to attack, but Davy was restraining his impetuosity. No, don't do it. Keep calm. thus far with the greatest difficulty, and who had repeatedly interposed with the first syllable of scoundrel, without getting out the second, now burst forward, drew the ruler from his breast, apparently as a defensive weapon, so he was holding the ruler like a sword, and produced from his pocket a foolscap document. I don't know what a foolscap is. Foolscap. A size of paper now standardized about 13 by 8. So about 13 by 8 inches. So regular sheet of paper, I think. A typical sheet of paper. A foolscap document folded in the form of a large letter, opening this packet with his old flourish. A flourish is like an extravagant moving. This is flourishing, or, a beautiful movement. So Mr. Micawber likes to pretend to be very elegant. So when he took out the letter, he didn't just open it. He unfolded it in a very beautiful way. Opening this packet with his old flourish and glancing at the contents as if he cherished. When you cherish something, you love it very much. As if he cherished an artistic admiration for their style of composition. So Mr. Micawber probably wrote this document, and he loves the sound of his own voice. So when he first looked at it, he said, "Oh yeah, that's beautiful. I love the way I talk. I love the way I write." He began to read as follows. "Dear Miss Trotwood and gentlemen, bless and save the man," exclaimed my aunt in a low voice. "He'd write letters by the ream if it was a capital offense." So Mr. Micawber can just speak to them directly, but he preferred to put it in a letter so he could choose each word. He loves to write letters. So his Davy's aunt is saying he'd write letters even if they were threatened to execute him. Mr. Micawber, without hearing her, went on. "In appearing before you to denounce and probably the most consummate villain who ever existed, Mr. Micawber, without looking off the letter, pointed the ruler, like a ghostly truncheon, at Uriah Heep. I ask no consideration for myself, the victim from my cradle of pecuniary liabilities to which I have been unable to respond." So, again, this is going to be complicated because it's Mr. Micawber talking and he uses very unusual language. So, he's saying, when you listen to me, don't think about who's writing this. Because I know that I'm no good. I always owe debts and owe money to people, but it's not my fault. I was born that way. I have never been able to sport and toy of debasing circumstances. Ignominy, want, despair, and madness have collectively or separately been the attendants of my career. So he's making all these excuses that why he's always in such a bad in such bad circumstances. The relish. When you relish something, you enjoy it. So imagine eating your favorite food. Like, I try not to eat pizza because it makes me fat, but I love pizza. So maybe once or twice a year I have pizza, and then when I do, I don't just eat it. Oh, this is so delicious. I relish it. I enjoy it. Does that make sense? So Mr. Micawber is relishing this. He said the relish with which Mr. Micawber described himself as a prey of the dismal calamities was only to be equaled by the emphasis with which he read his letter. So Mr. Micawber enjoys telling you what a victim he is. I'm a nice person, but you see, I was born with all of these problems, and that's why I have these horrible circumstances. He loves telling that story. He does it with relish. He enjoys it. and the kind of homage he rendered to it with a roll of his head. And when he thought he had hit a sentence very hard indeed. So he's really enjoying this. He's speaking the letter in a very beautiful way and enjoying all of the words as they come out. He's relishing it. In an accumulation of ignominy, want, despair, and madness, I entered the office, or, as our lively neighbor the Gaul would term it, the bureau. Gaul is another word for France. And bureau is the French word for office. So I guess their neighbor is French. So he's saying, or as our neighbor would call this office, the bureau of the firm, nominally conducted under the appellation of Wickfield and Heap, but in reality wielded by Heap alone. When you wield something, you hold something powerful. So if you have a gun, you can wield a gun. That means operating or being in charge of a gun. Or you could wield a sword. Oh, but I just want to check my definition of wield. To hold and use a weapon or tool. And let's see, ignominy is public shame or disgrace. I think we've had that word before, but I forget it. I don't know how many times it takes me to read a definition before I remember what that word is. Ignominy, public shame or disgrace. Wickfield and Heap, but in reality wielded by Heap alone. So the name of the law office is Wickfield and Heap, but Mr. Wickfield doesn't do anything anymore. He just stays in bed, and all of the power is Heap's. Heap wields the office like a weapon. Heap alone. Heap is the mainspring of that machine. Heap, and only Heap, is the forger and the cheat. When you that verb to forge means, if you think about how people used to get food in very primitive times, you had hunters and farmers, but you also had forgers. Forgers would go around looking, like in the forest, for food on the ground. They don't hunt, they don't farm, they just look on the trees or on the ground for food. So if you're foraging for something, you're just looking through things, trying to find something. And says, especially if it's not in your native language, it's more difficult. That's true. So imagine I have to read a word like 10 times before I can remember it. Hopefully only 10 times, but I can't imagine if you're just learning English how difficult that could be. But ignominy, that's not really, probably if you use that word, you could if you wanted to, but maybe a lot of people wouldn't understand that word, like me. I mean, until I read it 10 or 15 times, then maybe I'll remember finally. It's not a common word. So Mr. Micawber is calling Heap a forger. He's looking around for things, and a cheat. Uriah, more blue than white at these words, made a dart at the letter. He's trying to take the letter from Mr. Micawber, as if to tear it in pieces. Mr. Micawber, with a perfect miracle of dexterity. Dexterity means like very good with your hands, doing something very good with your hands. With a perfect miracle of dexterity or luck, caught his advanced knuckles with the ruler. So remember, he's reading the letter and holding the ruler, and when Heap tried to grab the letter from him, Mr. Micawber hit him with the ruler on his knuckles. These are your knuckles. And disabled his right hand. It dropped at the wrist, as if it were broken. The elbow sounded as if it had fallen on wood. The devil take you, said Uriah, writhing. Remember, writhing is the movement of a snake. The devil take you, writhing in a new way with pain. I'll be even with you. So that means I'll get revenge. Sircon says ig nome. Nome means name. So let's remember as no name or as nameless. Maybe like maybe meaning like taking away your name. The devil take you, said Uriah, writhing in a new way with pain. I'll be even with you. Approach me again, you heap of infamy. So, to be famous means everybody knows who you are. But if you're infamous, that means you're famous for doing bad things. So they're very similar words, but being famous isn't necessarily a bad thing. But being infamous is. That means you're famous because you do bad things. Approach me again, you heap of infamy. Gasped Mr. Micawber. Gasping is taking a big deep breath very quickly. And if your head is human, I'll break it. So Mr. Micawber is questioning if Heap is even a human. And if your head is human, I'll break it. Come on. Come on. I think I never saw anything more ridiculous. I was sensible of it, even at the time that Mr. Micawber, making broad sword guards with the ruler and crying, come on, come on, while Traddles and I pushed him back into a corner, from which, as often we got him into, he persisted in emerging again. His enemy muttered. Muttering is when you talk, but kind of like this. Like usually you mutter something when you're angry, and you have to get the words out, but you really don't want people to hear it because they'll be angry or offended or something like that. So muttering usually happens when you're angry, and you have to say it, but you don't really want to say it. His enemy muttering to himself, like maybe Uriah is sitting there saying, I can't believe they're doing this. Something like that. It's not really words meant for other people. It's words only meant for yourself because you're angry or upset. His enemy muttering, and it's not very loud. His enemy muttering to himself after wringing his wounded hand. So he's doing this with his hand, the hand that Mr. Micawber whacked with the ruler. Slowly drew off his neckkerchief and bound it up. So his hand hurt so much he took off his neckkerchief, his tie, and wrapped it around his wrist. Then he held it out. Then he held out his other hand and sat upon the table with his sullen face, looking down. Mr. Micawber, when he was sufficiently cool, proceeded with his letter. These stipendiary emoluments, in consideration of which I entered into the service of Heap, always pausing before that word, and uttering it with astonishing vigor, were not defined beyond the pittance of 22 shillings and 6 per week. Pittance means something very small and insignificant. So if you're getting paid a pittance, that means you're not getting paid enough. You're getting paid a very small amount of money. The rest was left contingent upon the value of my professional exertions, and other and more expressive words on the baseness of my nature, the cupidity of my movements, and the poverty of my family, the general moral, or rather immoral, resemblance between myself and Heap. Need I say that it soon became necessary for me to solicit from Heap pecuniary advances towards the support of Mrs. Micawber. So Mr. Micawber accepted the job for a very small amount of money, but that money could at least help him pay some of his debts. He's always in debt. And the rest of it was sort of promised to him, but never given. And so eventually he needed more money, and so those came as advances. And an advance on your salary means, oh, can you give me more this month of my salary? And then maybe next month, don't give me so much. That's an advance on your salary. Need I say that it soon became necessary for me to solicit. Solicit means ask for. From heap, pecuniary advances, money advances, towards the support of Mrs. Micawber and our blighted but rising family. Need I say that this necessity had been foreseen by heap, that those advances were secured by IOUs. So remember, do I still have that up here? Because we talked about that before, but where's my layers? Yeah. Let me just show you this, because we talked about this before. See, if you see this word IOU, that means I owe you money. So when somebody gives you a loan, not a bank, but you're talking to your friends or a business partner or something like that, and you say, oh, I need some money. Can you please lend me some money? Usually you'll write a little letter saying, okay, on this day, John gave me $100 and I will repay him the $100 next month. And this is called an IOU, but it's usually written like this with the letters IOU, which means, it really means I owe you money, but we write it with just letters, IOU. That those advances were secured by IOUs and other similar acknowledgments known to the legal institutions of this country, and I thus became enmeshed in the web he had spun for my reception. Mr. Micawber's enjoyment of his epistolary powers, so his speech-giving powers, in his describing this unfortunate state of things, really seemed to outweigh any pain or anxiety that the reality could have caused him. He read on. That means he continued reading. Then it was that Heap began to favor me with just so much of his confidence. So remember, confidence means sharing secrets. So after Mr. Micawber owed Uriah money, then Uriah started sharing secrets with him because now he could trust him. Anne is asking about the word mesh. Enmesh, but I want to show you mesh first, to show you what a mesh is. Let's see what kind of pictures we get. Oh, good. We get normal pictures. Okay. So a mesh is kind of like this. Let's see. This is a mesh. It's kind of like a net. And I think they even made reference. These are all meshes. To be enmeshed in something means to be trapped. Imagine like a fish. You go fishing and you put a net, which is a type of mesh. A net is a type of mesh. You put a net into the water and you hope to catch the fish. And when you pull out the fish they can't move. They can't move from this trap. So to be enmeshed in something means to be trapped in something in a way where you can't escape it. Where was that? Wasn't that just, and that I must become enmeshed in the web. A web is a type of mesh. that he had spun for my reception. So Uriah is like a spider creating a trap, and then Mr. Micawber fell into the trap, and now he can't escape from it. He's trapped in it. He has no choice but to be involved in all of this. Then it was Heap who began to favor me with just so much of his confidence as was necessary to discharge of his infernal business. You know the word furnace is like creating heat. The inferno, that's another word for hell, inferno. You have that word fern, so that you could think of that as being part of fornaio, that's like an Italian word. It means like oven. All these, I don't know what fern means, but it has something to do with creating heat. But the inferno, that's hell. That's where you go if you're bad. And something that is infernal is something evil, something horrible, something that belongs in hell. Let's see. So this infernal business, this is like evil business, bad business. Then it was that I began, if I may say, so Shakespeareanly express myself, to dwindle, peak, and pine. I found that my services were constantly called into requisition for the falsification of business, and the mystification of an individual whom I will designate as Mr. W., and that Mr. W. was imposed upon, kept in ignorance, and deluded in every possible way. So Uriah was having him make fake documents and do things like that. That all this while the ruffian, Heap, was professing unbounded gratitude to and unbounded friendship for that much abused gentleman. So that Mr. W. is Mr. Wickfield. This was bad enough. But, as the philosophic Dane observes, with that universal applicability which distinguishes the illustrious ornament of the Elizabethan era, worse remains behind. Mr. Micawber was so very much struck by this happy rounding off with a quotation that he indulged himself and us with a second reading of the sentence under the pretense of having lost his place. Remember, pretense means excuse. So he loved the way he wrote this so much, he pretended that he lost his place so he could read it again for everyone to hear. It was not my intention, he continued, reading on, to enter on a detailed list within the compass of the present epistle, though it is ready elsewhere, of the various malpractices. So there we have the word mal again, meaning evil. So you have a practice, you do something, best practices. Malpractice is doing something in a very bad way, doing something the wrong way. And this is the word that you use when you have a professional who isn't doing things properly. So if you go to a doctor and the doctor does something bad to you because he doesn't know what he's doing, this is called malpractice. If you go to a lawyer and the lawyer gives you bad advice because he doesn't know what he's doing, that's called malpractice. So there we have the word mal again, meaning bad or evil. Of the various malpractices of a minor nature affecting the individual whom I have denominated Mr. W., to which I have been a tacitly consenting party, my object, when the contest within myself between stipend and no stipend, baker and no baker, existence and non-existence ceased, was to take advantage of my opportunities to discover and expose the major malpractices committed to that gentleman's grievous wrong and injury by Heap, stimulated by the silent monitor within, and by a no less touching and appealing monitor without, to whom I will briefly refer to as Miss W., I entered on a not unlaborious task of clandestine investigation. So again, let me just remind you, don't feel bad if you can't understand Mr. Micawber. He speaks in a very strange way, and it's very hard for me to understand what he's saying. But he's saying that after he owed Uriah Heep money, then Uriah Heep was able to trust him with committing fraud in the name of Mr. Wickfield and doing bad things. But eventually, when Mr. Micawber had enough money so that he wouldn't have to starve his family, he started trying to figure out a way to expose Heep. And he even went to the daughter. He went to Agnes, Miss W., Miss Wickfield. And together they started clandestinely, clandestine means secretly, to form a plan to get Uriah. Now, to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief, over a period exceeding 12 calendar months, he read this passage as if it were an act of parliament and appeared majestically. Majestically means like a king, refreshed by the sound of the words. My charges against Heep, he read on, glancing at him and drawing the ruler into a convenient position under his left arm. Oh, so he put it here in case of need. So he put his ruler here in case he needed to whack Heep again. Are as follows. We all held our breath, I think. I'm sure Uriah held his. First, said Mr. Micawber, when Mr. W.'s faculties and memory for business became, through causes into which it is not necessary or expedient for me to enter, weakened and confused, Heep designedly perplexed and complicated the whole of the official transactions. So Mr. Wickfield drinks a lot of alcohol, and Heep was giving him more and more. Come on, drink more, have more. And when he was no longer able to know what was happening around him, Heep started confusing him. That's what perplex means. Anne is leaving. Okay, well, thank you for watching, Anne. I hope that you watch later when we continue. Have a good day or night or wherever you are. I don't know. So Uriah was feeding him more alcohol and confusing him, and maybe he was just saying, "Here, sign this, sign that," and Mr. Wickfield didn't really know what was happening. When Mr. W. was least fit to enter on business, Heep was always at hand. To be at hand means to be very close by. Heep was always at hand to force him to enter on it. He obtained Mr. W.'s signature under such circumstances to documents of importance, representing them to be other documents of no importance. So Uriah would say, "Here, sign this. It's just, it's no, don't look at it. It's nothing." But it was always very important. He induced Mr. W. to empower him to draw out, thus, one particular sum of trust money. So remember, draw means extract, and you could see that when you go to the bank, when you take money from the bank, you withdraw money. That means taking money away from the bank. And they're using draw here to draw out some money from a bank, from 12 to 614 to a 9. So those are old Victorian currencies. And employed it to meet pretended business charges and deficiencies which were either already provided for or had never really existed. Sircon says now use withdraw. I'm not sure what you're asking, Sircon. Yes, I mean that's how you talk about taking money from the bank. You say, I'm going to withdraw money. So if you go to the machine, the ATM machine, you'll probably see that word withdrawal, but let me spell that because that's kind of a weird word. So you definitely see that at an ATM machine. Whoops. Withdrawal. Actually, but also, so that's a noun form. I was hoping that maybe, can we see this on the screen? Let me see if we can read this. You'll actually see that on the machine. Can we read that anywhere? Deposit. Whoops. It's too difficult to read. Oh yeah, here you can see right above my head. Look above my head. Cash withdrawal. So you'll definitely see that at the bank. But if you don't go to the machine, if you go inside the bank to the person behind the window who's called a teller, you would say, I would like to make a withdrawal. That means I would like to take out money. So that word draw means extract or take out or take away. Oh, let me get rid of the word withdrawal. Okay. I think this is a long chapter. Where did we see that? Okay. He gave this proceeding throughout the appearance of having originated in Mr. W.'s own honest intention, and of having been accomplished by Mr. W.'s own dishonest act, and has used it ever since to torture and constrain him. So Uriah took money from other people's accounts and made it look like Mr. Wickfield did it, and he used that to have power over him. Ask, heap, Mr. Traddles, who lived in his house after him, said Mr. Micawber, breaking off from the letter, will you? The fool himself, and lives there now, said Uriah disdainfully. Ask, heap, if he ever kept a pocket-book in that house, said Mr. Micawber, will you? I saw Uriah's lank hand stop involuntarily in the scraping of his chin. Or ask him, said Mr. Micawber, if he ever burnt one there. If he says yes, and asks you where the ashes are, refer him to Wilkins Micawber, and he will hear something not at all of his advantage. So Uriah tried to burn the evidence, but Mr. Micawber saved it. It seems like. I think that sometimes I don't understand what Mr. Micawber is saying either, but I think that's what he's saying. The triumphant flourish with which Mr. Micawber, so remember, flourish is like a big fancy movement. The triumphant flourish with which Mr. Micawber delivered himself of these words had a powerful effect in the alarming the mother, who cried out in much agitation. Sircon says, does he want to make himself clear in the court? Mr. Micawber isn't worried about being clear. Mr. Micawber is worried about speaking, using very fancy words, and Mr. Micawber is all about ceremony. He loves big, beautiful movements. He loves big, beautiful clothes. He loves big, beautiful words. He loves long, big, beautiful letters. That's the only thing he cares about. So, no, he doesn't care about sounding clear in court. He cares about sounding fancy in court, even though that could be an obstacle. It is an obstacle. Yuri, be humble and make terms, my dear. To make terms means to come to an agreement. Mother, he retorted, will you keep quiet? You're in a fright, and you don't know what you mean. Humble, he repeated, looking at me with a snarl. A snarl, that's a look of hate. Your lip goes up one side. like a dog. That's a snarl. It's a look of hatred and violence. I've umbled some of 'em for a pretty long time back, umble as I was. Mr. Micawber genteelly adjusting his chin in his cravat, presently proceeded with his composition. Second, Heap has on several occasions, to the best of my knowledge, information and belief. But that won't do, muttered Uriah, relieved. Mother, you keep quiet. If something won't do, that means it's not sufficient, it's not enough. So Uriah is saying, oh, is that all you have? That's not going to do anything. Now he's suddenly feeling more comfortable. We will endeavor to provide something that will do. So we will give something that will be sufficient. And do for you finally, sir, very shortly, replied Mr. Micawber. Second, Heap has on several occasions, to the best of my knowledge, information and belief systematically forged to various entries in books. When something is forged, that means that you are replacing authentic information with lies, or you're writing something on paper and saying that somebody else wrote it. So Uriah is changing numbers or changing words or signing Mr. Wickfield's signature without his knowledge. That's what forging means. To various entries, books, and documents, and the signature of Mr. W., and has distinctly done so in one instance capable of proof by me, to wit, in manner following, that is to say. Again, Mr. Micawber had a relish for this formal piling up of words, which, however ludicrous means something so stupid that you laugh at it. And the way Mr. Micawber talks is ludicrous. However ludicrous displayed in his case was, I must say, not at all peculiar to him. I have observed it in the course of my life in numbers of men. It seems to me to be a general rule in the taking of legal oaths. For instance, deponents seem to enjoy themselves mightily when they come to several good words in succession for the expression of one idea, as they utterly detest, abominate, and abjure, or so forth. And the old anathemas were made relishing on the same principle. We talk about the tyranny of words, but we like to tyrannize over them too. We are fond of having a large, superfluous means extra and unnecessary. So we love to have superfluous establishment of words to wait upon us on great occasions. We think it looks important and sounds well. And we are not particular about the meaning of our liveries on state occasions, but if they be but fine and numerous enough so, the meaning or necessity of our words is a secondary consideration. If there be but a great parade of them, and as individuals get into trouble by making too great or too show of liveries, or as slaves, when they are too numerous, rise against their masters, so I think I could mention a nation that has got into many great difficulties, and will get into many greater, from the maintaining of too large a retinue of words. So, wow. So he's saying that, Mr. Micawber loves to use all of these words, and he's enjoying, he put a lot of time and thought into making each sentence of this letter that he's reading. But even for Mr. Micawber, it's too much. And he's even implying that this will be the fall of England, it just has too many words, and there are too many different meanings to all of these words, and eventually this will cause England to fail somehow. And maybe he's right. Mr. Micawber read on, almost smacking his lips. And remember that smack, it's like a slap, but it's really the sound that you want to hear. Smack is really that sound. It's not so much, it does mean slap, but it's the sound that's important. So if you smack your lips, that's the same sound. Mr. Micawber, almost smacking his lips, to wit, in manner following, that is to say, Mr. W, being infirm means sick, and it being within the bounds of probability that his decease might lead to some discoveries and to the downfall of Heap's power over the W family, as I, Wilkins Micawber, the undersigned, assume, unless the filial affection of his daughter could be secretly influenced from allowing any investigation of the partnership's affairs ever to be made, the said Heap deemed it expedient to have a bond ready by him, as from Mr. W, from before mentioned the sum of 12 6 in time, and 9, with interest, stated wherein to have been advanced by Heap. All right, this is hard to follow because of the way Mr. Micawber is talking, but also I think it's a complicated crime that's happening. But from what I can understand, and I don't understand everything of what he's saying here, is that it's obvious that Mr. Wickfield is probably going to be dying pretty soon. So now Heap is trying to take precautions to hold all of this fraud together after he dies, because after Mr. Wickfield dies, it will be discovered when the lawyers try to distribute the money and all of that there are some inconsistencies or problems. So I think in anticipation of that, Uriah wants to marry Agnes. Though really the sum was never advanced to him and has long been replaced. The signatures to this instrument purporting to be executed by Mr. W and attested by Wilkins Micawber are forgeries by Heap. I have in my possession, in his hand and pocketbook, several similar imitations of Mr. W's signature. So Heap has been practicing writing Mr. Wickfield's signature so he could sign it to anything, and Micawber has the paper where he was practicing. Here and there defaced by fire, but legible to anyone, I never attested any such document, and I have the document itself in my possession. So Micawber never signed these documents. Heap has been forging people's signatures. He's been writing their names and making it look like the other person wrote it. Uriah Heap, with a start, took out his pocket a bunch of keys and opened a certain drawer, and then suddenly bethought himself of what he was about, and turned again toward us, without looking in it. And I have the document, Mr. Micawber read again, looking as if it were the text of a sermon, in my possession. That is to say, I had early this morning when this was written, but have since relinquished it. To relinquish something means to let it go, to give it, to surrender the property to someone else. I have since relinquished it to Mr. Traddles. It is quite true, assented Traddles. Uri, cried Mother, be humble and make terms. Make terms means make an agreement. I know my son will be humble, gentlemen, if you'll give him time to think, Mr. Copperfield. I'm sure you know that he was always very humble, sir. It was singular to see how the mother still held to the old trick when the son had abandoned it as useless. Mother, he said, with an impatient bite, and a handkerchief in which his hand was wrapped. You had better take and fire a loaded gun at me. So he's telling his mother to shoot him. But I love you, Uri, cried his mother, and I have no doubt she did, or that he loved her, however strange it may appear, though to be sure, they were a congenial couple. And I can't bear to hear you provoking the gentleman, and endangering of yourself more. I told the gentleman at first, when he told me upstairs it was come to light, that I would answer for you being humble, and make amends. Oh, see how humble I am, gentlemen, and don't mind me. Why, there's Copperfield, mother, he angrily retorted, pointing his lean finger at me, almost whom all his animosity was leveled, as the prime mover in the discovery, and I did not undeceive him. There's Copperfield, would have given you £100 to say less than you've blurted out. To blurt something out means to, sometimes you keep something inside of yourself. You want to say it, but you don't. So usually that's with a secret. You have a secret in your head and you want to tell everyone, and it's driving you crazy, and suddenly you say, I'm the thief, I'm the one who stole it. You release your secret. That's blurting something out. I can't help it, Yuri, cried his mother. I can't see you running into danger through carrying your head so high. Better be humble, as you always was. He remained for a little, biting the handkerchief, and then said to me with a scowl, a look of hate, What more have you got to bring forward, if anything? Go on with it. What do you look at me for? Mr. Micawber promptly resumed his letter, glad to revert to a performance, with which he was so highly satisfied. Third, and last, I am now in a condition to show by heaps false books, and heaps real memoranda, beginning with the partially destroyed pocketbook, which I was unable to comprehend at the time of its accidental discovery by Mrs. Micawber, and our taking possession of our present abode in the locker or bin devoted to the reception of ashes calcined on the domestic hearth, that the weakness, the faults, the very virtues, the parental affections and sense of honor of the happy Mr. W. have been for years acted on and warped to the base purposes of Heap. So Mr. Micawber, Uriah has been burning the evidence in the fire, but every time Mr. Micawber had an opportunity, he would take those things out of the fire. So they're burnt a little bit or a lot, but there's still evidence of what Heap was doing, which was cheating all of Mr. Wickfield's customers and cheating Mr. Wickfield and stealing their money, and making it look like Mr. Wickfield had done it. That Mr. W. had been for years deluded and plundered. When you plunder, you go in somewhere and you take everything away. So when pirates plunder a city, they arrive in the city and they go and they take everything from the shops. That's plundering. In every conceivable manner, to the pecuniary aggrandizement of the avaricious, false, and grasping Heap. That the engrossing object of Heap was next to gain to subdue Mr. and Mrs. W. of his ulterior views. In reference to the latter, I say nothing. Entirely to himself. That his last act, completed but a few months since, was to induce Mr. W. to execute the relinquishment of his share in the partnership, and even a bill of sale on the very furniture of his house, in consideration of a certain annuity. I think we've talked about the word annuity before. Anno means year, and you have things like annual, which means every year, and an annuity is an amount of money that you receive every year for something. So Heap had almost convinced Mr. Wickfield to give Uriah the house and all the furniture and the entire business in exchange for a very small annuity, a very small amount of money every year. He almost did that, but he didn't yet. And on the 4 common quarter days in each and every year, that these meshes, beginning with the alarming and falsified accounts of the estate of which Mr. W. is the receiver, at a period when Mr. W. had launched into an imprudent and ill-judged speculations, and may not have had the money for which he was morally and legally responsible in hand, going on with pretended borrowings of money at enormous interest, really coming from heap, and by heap, fraudulently obtained or withheld from Mr. W. on pretense of such speculations or otherwise. Oh my God, it's so hard to read all of this because of the way he talks. It makes me tired just reading it. It's just nonsense. He could say all of this in just a few words. Okay, let's keep going. Gradually thickened until unhappy Mr. W. could see no world beyond, bankrupt, as he believed, alike in circumstances and all other hope. And in honor, his sole reliance was upon that monster in the garb of a man. Mr. Micawber made a good deal of this, as he knew, as a new turn of expression. Garb just means clothes. Who, by making himself necessary to him, had achieved his destruction. All this I undertake to show, probably much more. I whispered a few words to Agnes, who was weeping. Weeping is crying, half joyfully, half sorrowfully at my side, and there was a movement among us as if Mr. Micawber had finished. He said, with an exceeding gravity, "Pardon me," and proceeded. There's more. With a mixture of the lowest spirits and most intense enjoyment, in the peroration of his letter. Let's look up. I want to take a Mr. Micawber break and look up peroration. The concluding part of a speech, typically intended to inspire enthusiasm in the audience. I have now concluded. It merely remains for me to substantiate. Substantiate means prove these accusations, and then with my ill-starred family to disappear from the landscape in which we appear to be an encumbrance. So he's saying, all I want to do now is go away with my family, away from England. All of that just to say, I just want to get out of England. This is soon done. It may reasonably be inferred that our baby will first expire of a nation as being the frailest member of our circle, that our twins will follow next in order. So be it. For myself, my Canterbury pilgrimage has done much imprisonment on civil process and want, will soon do more. I trust the labor and hazard of investigation, of which the smallest results have been slowly pieced together, in the pressure of arduous avocations under grinding, penurious apprehensions. At the rise of morn, at dewy eve, in the shadows of night, under the watchful eye of one whom it were superfluous to call demon, combined with the struggle of parental poverty to turn it, when completed, to the right account, may as be the sprinkling of a few drops of sweet water on my future pyre. I ask no more. Let it be, in justice, merely said of me, as of a gallant and eminent naval hero, with whom I have no pretensions to cope. That I have done, I did, in despite of mercenary and selfish objects, for England, home, and beauty, remaining always Wilkins Micawber. Much affected, but still intensely enjoying himself, Mr. Micawber folded up his letter and handed it with a bow to my aunt as something she might like to keep. Really, Sir Con is saying there are almost 10 pages left. Well, let's do it. Let's push on through. I've got time, so we might as well do it. But I think maybe I will take a 1-minute break, and get something to drink. I'm out of tea. But I think we have to push through. Why not? Let me change to my... I can't believe there's still 10 pages left. Oh my, that's going to be another hour. All right. I've got my second wind back. Let's keep going. There was, I had noticed on my first visit long ago, an iron safe in the room. The key was in it. A hasty suspicion seemed to strike Uriah. And with a glance at Mr. Micawber, he went to it, and threw the doors clanking open. Clanking is the sound of two pieces of metal hitting each other. And just in case you don't know what a safe is, I think we better look at that word. This is a safe. So there's a safe in that office, and Uriah was looking kind of suspicious, and Mr. Micawber went to the safe and opened it, and he said clanking it open, which means when you opened it, you could hear the metal hitting other metal. You could hear a sound. Oh, so not Mr. Micawber, but oh wait, let's see. Uriah, I think, went to the safe and opened it, and he said, "Where are the books?" he cried with a frightful face. "Some thief has stolen the books." Mr. Micawber tapped himself with the ruler. "I did, when I got the key from you as usual, but a little earlier, and opened it this morning." "Don't be uneasy," said Traddles. "They've come into my possession. I will take care of them under the authority I mentioned." "Do you receive stolen goods, do you?" cried Uriah. "Under such circumstances," answered Traddle, "yes." So those books must have a lot of evidence in them of Uriah's fraud. "Under such circumstances," answered Traddle, "yes." What was my astonishment when I beheld my aunt, who had been profoundly quiet and attentive, made a dart at Uriah Heep and seized him by the collar with both hands. So the aunt got up and grabbed Uriah by the shirt, by his collar, with both hands. "You know what I want," said my aunt. A straight waistcoat," said he. "No, my property," returned my aunt. "Agnes, my dear, as long as I believed it had been really made away with by your father, I wouldn't, and my dear, I didn't, even to Trot, as he knows, breathe a syllable of its having been placed here for investment." So, earlier in the story, because Davy's aunt, she had money, she had a nice little house by the sea, and she was very comfortable in her life. But suddenly one day she showed up in London and she said, "I'm broke. I don't have any money. I have to rent out my house or sell my house because I have and she had to stay with Davy, who was just a student going to school. And she told him a story that she was stupid and she had invested the money very bad. She made some very bad financial decisions. But you see, that wasn't really the truth, actually. But she didn't want to say what the truth was, because it seemed like Mr. Wickfield had lost the money for her, because Mr. Wickfield does investments for people or gives financial advice. But she never wanted to implicate him or say that it was his fault. So she said, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I invested it in some very bad things." And now the aunt is saying, "Aha, I knew Mr. Wickfield never would have done that with my money. It was you. You stole my money. Give me back my money." That's what she's doing now. "But I know this fellow is answerable for it." So she's saying, "I know Uriah is the one who took my money. And I'll have it, Trot. Come and take it away from me." Whether my aunt supposed for a moment that he kept her property in his neckerchief. So she's asking, "Give me my money." And Davy's like, he doesn't have the money. What, she thinks he's got it hidden in his tie? That he kept her property in his neckerchief? I'm not sure. I don't know. But she certainly pulled at it as if she thought so. I hastened to put myself between them and to assure her that we would all take care that he should make the utmost restitution. Restitution means when you do something bad to someone, you have to make up for it by paying probably money. So, imagine if somebody gets hit by a car and they can't work. Then the person who hit them has to pay them restitution. They have to pay them the money that they lost from not being able to work. This and a few moments' reflection pacified her. That word pacify means make peaceful. But she was not at all disconcerted by what she had done, though I cannot say as much for her bonnet, and resumed her seat composedly. So she was angry, she showed her anger, but now she's composed again. She had a seat composedly. She sat without showing any more anger or emotion. During the last few minutes, Mrs. Heep had been clamoring to her son to be unable, and had been going down on her knees to all of us in succession and making the wildest promises. Her son sat her down in his chair, and standing sulkily by her, holding her arm with his hand, but not rudely, said to me with a ferocious look, "What do you want done?" "I will tell you what must be done," said Traddles. Has that Copperfield no tongue?" muttered Uriah. "I would do a good deal for you if you could tell me without lying that somebody had to cut it out." "My Uriah means to be humble," cried his mother. "Don't mind what he says, good gentleman." "What must be done," said Traddles, "is this. First, the deed of relinquishment." So relinquish means let go of. So the document that says you let go of something that we have heard of must be given over to me now, here. Suppose I haven't got it. So that deed of relinquishment, maybe he got Mr. Wickfield to sign the paper, giving everything, relinquishing everything to Uriah. And now they're saying, give us that document. A deed is a document that says, this person owns this. And so Uriah says, suppose I haven't got it. But you have, said Traddles. Therefore, you know, we won't suppose so. And I cannot help avowing that this was the first occasion on which I really did justice to the clear head and the plain, patient, practical good sense of my old schoolfellow. Then, said Traddles, you must prepare to disgorge all that your rapacity has become possessed of. Oh, disgorge, I think, means like remove yourself from or let go of. Disgorge. To discharge by the throat or the mouth, like throw up, like vomit. And let's look at rapacity. I think I've looked that one up before, but I always forget it. Aggressive greed. So you must disgorge, vomit all of your rapacity has become possessed of, and make the restoration of the last farthing. So he's saying you have to repay everything that you stole. All the partnership books and papers must remain in our possession, and all your books and papers, all money accounts and securities of both kinds, in short, everything here. Must it? I don't know that, said Uriah. I must have time to think about that. Certainly, replied Traddles. But in the meanwhile, and until everything is done to our satisfaction, we shall maintain possession of these things and beg you, in short, compel you, that means make you, force you, to keep your own room and hold no communication with anyone. So he's saying, okay, you can think about it, but while you're thinking about it, we're going to keep you a prisoner in your room, and you can't leave or talk to anyone. I won't do it, said Uriah, with an oath. Maidstone jail is a safer place of detention, observed Traddles, and though the law may be longer in writing us, and may not be able to write us so completely as you can, there's no doubt of its punishing you. Dear me, you know that quite as well as I, Copperfield. You will go sound to the Guildhall and bring a couple of officers. So Traddles says, fine. You don't have to be a prisoner here. You can think about it in jail. And maybe, but if you go to jail, that's going to be really bad. You'll spend a long time there, and we're giving you the option of not going to jail. Here, Mrs. Heep broke out again, crying on her knees to Agnes to interfere on their behalf, exclaiming that he was very humble, and it was all true. And if he didn't go what we wanted, if he didn't do what we wanted, she would. She would, and much more to the same purpose, being half frantic with fears for her darling, to inquire what he might have done. If he had any boldness, would be like inquiring what a mongrel cur might do if it had the spirit of a tiger. What's a cur? Cur. An aggressive dog, or one that is in poor condition, especially a mongrel. Mongrel is an insult, but I'm not really sure what the real meaning of it is. A dog of no definable type or breed. So that's like the word mutt. He was a coward from head to foot, and showed his dastardly nature through his sullenness and mortification, as much as any time of his mean life. "Stop!" he growled to me, and wiped his hot face with his hand. "Mother, hold your noise. Well, let him have that deed. Go and fetch it." "Do you help her, Mr. Dick?" said Traddles. "If you please." Proud of his commission, and understanding it, Mr. Dick accompanied her as a shepherd's dog might accompany a sheep. But Mrs. Heep gave him little trouble, for she not only returned with the deed, but with the box in which it was, and where we found a banker's book and some other papers that were afterwards serviceable, that meaning useful. "Good," said Traddles, when this was brought. "Now, Mr. Heep, you can retire to think, particularly observing, if you please, that I declare to you, on the part of all present, that there is only one thing to be done, and that is what I have explained, and that it must be done without delay." Uriah, without lifting his eyes from the ground, shuffled across the room with his hand to his chin, and pausing at the door, said, "Copperfield, I have always hated you. You've always been an upstart. You've always been against me." "As I think I told you once before," said I, "it is you who have been in your greed and cunning against all the world. It may be profitable to you to reflect in the future that there never were greed and cunning in the world yet that did not do too much and overreach themselves. It is as certain as death, or as certain as they used to teach at school, the same school where I picked up so much humbleness. For 9 o'clock to 11, that labor was a curse, and from 11 o'clock to 1, that it was a blessing and a cheerfulness and a dignity, and I don't know what all, eh?" said he with a sneer. "You preach about as consistent as they did. Won't humbleness go down?" I shouldn't have got round my gentleman fellow partner without it, I think, Micawber. "You old bully, I'll pay you." Mr. Micawber, supremely defiant of him and his extended finger, and making a great deal of his chest until he had slunk out the door, then addressed himself to me, and proffered me with the satisfaction of witnessing the re-establishment of mutual confidence, that's like mutual trust, between himself and Mrs. Micawber. After which he invited the company generally to the contemplation of that affecting spectacle. The veil has long been interposed between Mrs. Micawber and myself, is now withdrawn. So withdraw, here that means taken back. So there was a curtain between him and his wife. They always shared secrets and told everybody everything, each other everything. But during this time, Mrs. Micawber was complaining that Mr. Micawber wasn't sharing secrets with her, wasn't having conversations with her anymore. And now the curtain is withdrawn. It's taken away. The veil is withdrawn. And my children and the author of their being can once more come in contact on equal terms. As we were all very grateful to him and all desirous to show that we were, as well as the hurry and disorder of our spirits would permit, I dare say we should have all gone, but that it was necessary for Agnes to return to her father, and yet unable to bear more than the dawn of hope, and for someone else to hold Uriah in safe keeping. So Traddles remained for the latter purpose, to be presently relieved by Mr. Dick, and Mr. Dick, my aunt, and I went home with Mr. Micawber, as I parted hurriedly from the dear girl whom I owed so much, and the thought from what she had been saved, perhaps that morning, her better resolution notwithstanding, I felt devoutly thankful for the miseries of my younger days, which had brought me to the knowledge of Mr. Micawber. His house was not so far off, and as the street door opened into the sitting room, and he bolted in with the precipitation quite his own, we found ourselves at once in the bosom of the family. Mr. Micawber exclaiming, "Emma, my life," rushed into Mrs. Micawber's arms. Mrs. Micawber shrieked and folded Mr. Micawber in her embrace. Miss Micawber, nursing the unconscious stranger of Mrs. Micawber's last letter to me, was sensibly affected. The stranger leaped. The twins testified their joy by several inconvenient but innocent demonstrations. Master Micawber, whose disposition appeared to have been soured by the earlier disappointment, and whose aspect had become morose, yielded to his better feelings, and blubbered. "Emma," said Mr. Micawber, "the cloud has passed from my mind. Mutual confidence, so long preserved between us once, is restored. To know no further interruption, now welcome poverty," cried Mr. Micawber, shedding tears. "Welcome misery, welcome houselessness, welcome hunger, rags, tempest, and beggary. Mutual confidence will sustain us to the end." With these expressions, Mr. Micawber placed Mrs. Micawber in a chair and embraced the family all around, welcoming a variety of bleak prospects which appeared the best to my judgment. He's saying, well, now I don't have a job anymore, so we're screwed. It's basically, but he's happy because he finally exposed Uriah Heep. To be anything but welcome to them, and calling upon them to come out into Canterbury and sing a chorus, as nothing else was left for their support. But Mrs. Micawber, having in the strength of her emotions fainted away, the first thing to be done, even before the chorus could be considered complete, was to recover her. This my aunt and Mr. Micawber did, and then my aunt was introduced, and Mr. Micawber recognized me, and Mrs. Micawber recognized me. "Excuse me, dear Mr. Copperfield," said the poor lady, giving me her hand, "but I am not strong, and the removal of late misunderstanding between Mr. Micawber and myself was too much for me." "Is this all your family, man?" said my aunt. "There is no more at present." We keep seeing that phrase, "at present," and that just means right now, at the moment. "There's no more at present," returned Mrs. Micawber. "Good gracious, I didn't mean that, ma'am," said my aunt. "I mean, are all these yours?" "Madam," replied Mr. Micawber, "it is a true bill." "And that the eldest young gentleman now," said my aunt, musing, "what has he been brought up to?" "It was my hope, when I came here," said Mr. Micawber, "to have got Wilkins into the church. Or perhaps I shall express my meaning more strictly if I say to the choir, but there was no vacancy for a tenor in the venerable pile for which this city is so justly eminent. And he has, in short, he has contracted a habit of singing in public houses rather than in sacred edifices. So he's singing in pubs. But he means well, which I guess maybe is implying he just goes to pubs and drinks. And the mother says, "But he means well," said Mrs. Micawber tenderly. "I dare say, my love," rejoined Mr. Micawber, "that he means particularly well, but I have not yet found that he carries out this meaning in any given direction whatsoever." So he just hangs out in bars. That's what the oldest son does. Master Micawber's moroseness of aspect returned upon him again, and he demanded with some temper, what was he to do? Whether he had been born a carpenter, a coach painter, any more than he had been born a bird, whether he could go into the next street and open a chemist's shop, whether he could rush to the next assizes and proclaim himself a lawyer, whether he could come out by force at the opera and succeed by violence, whether he could do anything without being brought up to do something. My aunt mused a little while and then said, "Mr. Micawber, I wonder you have never turned your thoughts to emigration." "Madam," returned Mr. Micawber, "it was the dream of my youth, and the fallacious aspiration of my riper years. I am thoroughly persuaded, by the by, that he had never thought of it in his life." "Aye," said my aunt with a glance. "Why, what a thing it would be for yourselves and your family, Mr. and Mrs. Micawber, if you were to emigrate now." Capital, that word capital means, oh, that's really great. "Capital, madam, capital," urged Mr. Micawber gloomily. "That is the principal, I may say, the only difficulty, my dear Copperfield," assented his wife. "Capital!" cried my aunt. "But you're doing us a great service. Have you done us a great service, I may say, for surely much will come out of the fire." "And what could we do for you that would be half so good as to find the capital?" Capital also means money. So she's saying, we could find the money for you to do it. "I could not receive it as a gift," said Mr. Micawber, full of fire and animation. "But if oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. We're getting close to the end, I think. "I could not receive it as a gift," said Mr. Micawber, full of fire and animation, "but if a sufficient sum could be advanced, say at a 5% interest per annum upon my personal liability, say my notes of hand, at 12, 18, and 24 months, respectively." So they're just working out the terms of a loan, but they're doing it in old Victorian money talk, and I don't understand it really. But he's saying, I could not accept the money, but I could write you an IOU and pay you interest on it, to allow the time for something to turn up. "Could be, can be, and shall be on your own terms," returned my aunt, "if you say the word. Think of this now, both of you. Here are some people David knows, going out to Australia shortly. If you decide to go, why, shouldn't you go in the same ship? You may help each other. Think of this now, Mr. and Mrs. Micawber. Take your time, and weigh it well." "There is but one question, my dear ma'am, I could wish to ask," said Mrs. Micawber. "The climate, I believe, is healthy?" "Finest in the world," said my aunt. "Just so," returned Mrs. Micawber. "Then my question arises. Now, are the circumstances of the country such that a man of Mr. Micawber's abilities would have a fair chance of rising in the social scale?" "I will not say at present might he aspire to be governor, or anything of that sort, but would there be a reasonable opening? for his talents to develop themselves, that would be amply sufficient and find their own expansion. No better anywhere, said my aunt, for a man who conducts himself well and is industrious. For a man who conducts himself well, repeated Mrs. Micawber, with her clearest business manner, and is industrious. Precisely. It is evident to me that Australia is the legitimate sphere of action for Mr. Micawber. Oh, Sir Con is saying, by the by, never heard it. Is it obsolete? Means by the way. Yes, it does mean by the way, and some people still use it. My mother used to say that all the time. It's a little bit different. Most people would say by the way, and I think it was probably more common 200 years ago than it is now. I noticed they use that phrase a lot in this book. So it must have been pretty common. But I don't think that, I mean, it's not weird. It's just a little bit not so common. I entertain the conviction, my dear madam, said Mr. Micawber, that is, under existing circumstances, the land and the land only, for myself and family, and that something of an extraordinary nature will turn up on that shore. It is no distance, comparatively speaking, and though consideration is due to the kindness of your proposal, I assure you that it is a mere matter of form. Shall I ever forget how in a moment he was the most sanguine of men, looking on to fortune, or how Mrs. Micawber presently discoursed about the habits of the kangaroo? Shall I ever recall that street of Canterbury on the market day without recalling him as he walked back with us, expressing in the hearty, roving manner he assumed the unsettled habits of a temporary sojourner in the land, and looking at the bullocks as they came by with the eye of an Australian farmer. Okay, well, that was the end of chapter 52 of David Copperfield, a pretty long chapter. Wow, almost 3 hours. Okay, well, thank you for staying and watching, and thank you for your comments and your questions, and I hope that you return. I'm probably going to try to read chapter 53 tonight, so in about maybe 5 hours or 6 hours, because we're getting so close to the end of the book. I just really want to finish it. So hopefully we'll do that later today. And thank you for watching, and thank you for your comments. And thank you, Serkan, for your nice comments. And I will see you later. Have a great day, great night, great morning, wherever you are. Goodbye.